Welcome to the Microsoft Security Insights Podcast with your hosts, Franklin Grimberg and Edward Walton, where we discuss Microsoft 365 security and Azure security news and products. Recorded April 13th, 2022. Good evening, Brody. Good evening, Rod. Good evening, Franklin. How's everyone doing?
Good. How about
and good
yourself?
evening, Michael.
Hey,
Well,
how
we
you
always say good evening, Michael, when we introduce the guests afterwards, right?
I know.
Yeah.
It's giving me a hard time.
Gotta
I
make
missed
it-
you, Ed. I keep
gotta
missing
make
you.
it-
You were off last week. I was off the week before. I haven't given you a hard time in a few weeks, so it's good
I
to
know.
see you again.
I know. I wish my absence were under better circumstances.
Oh yeah, it's all
Last week was personal, just anguish, and then travel anguish, right? Travel is not normal. Storms, delays, all type of
Good.
stuff. But I eventually got home.
I'm surprised you didn't know that if you're going to go from DC to New York and you're going to be in the city, just take Amtrak.
My
Don't
wife has been riding me about that because she said, "I told you," right? Yeah, I wanted to use it. I got a gazillion points, right? And they kept delaying the flight, cancel. Put us on another flight. Oh yeah, we're gonna make it. So instead of going into LaGuardia, we're gonna go into JFK. We sat on that plane for an hour and 30 minutes before they said, "Well, this is your captain. You're not gonna like what I'm about to say." And, so, and they got us off, and I had to find a hotel at about 10:45, 11 at night near the airports, because we had to be back to catch an 8:30 flight. So we got rebooked, and as soon as we got to the room, grabbed a quick little piece of something to eat, I checked the app, and it already said delayed to 10. And I'm like, we can't do this. So my wife's like, train? I'm like, yes. So we pushed the flight, jumped on Amtrak. Was actually not bad. You get the little luxury
nice.
card thing. Yeah, it's really nice. We call it the Alesia or something. It's actually pretty nice, right? And we got there, man. So I'm back. Miss you guys, man. Back in the grind, exciting things coming. Get more people want to come on the pod show that I can keep typing in the wiki to come on.
good stuff.
As I'm updating stuff. Oh, Brody, where you been?
Where have I been? Well,
Yeah.
I mean, I've
He's
been
been
here.
studying. He's been studying it for his AZ 104.
I have not. I've not been studying for that at all. I should never have let that lapse, and then I wouldn't have to do this all over again. Yeah. No, but no, I've just been working at it's Q4 consulting. Got a lot of gigs on the go. I got insight. I was just telling Frank before we started recording, I'm going to be delivering insider risk management. First time doing that, and then we have another MDE customer. MDE's hot right now, hot tamale, and just crushing customers before the end of the quarter, basically. And so things are good. Yeah, and it's a mix between spring and winter here right now. So I'm either going to the driving range one day or I'm skiing the other day. So it's kind of funny up here in Calgary how the weather changes on a dime. So life's good, man. It's good to see you again.
Yeah, same here, man. I miss you guys. Frankly.
I've had an interesting week. First of all, I went to a webcast today, Tech Talk today, about threat hunting with Defender and Sentinel by Damien in Canada, right? And I have to say, it was one of the best talks I've seen about it. So it was awesome. So if you ever get a chance to go to his presentation, definitely do it. I'm serious. I wish I could give that presentation. It was that good.
If it's recorded, man, send it to us so we can go back and watch the artifacts. I want to see it. Yeah.
I know
very,
Damien.
very, very good. Also, I learned something new this week. I take my kid to the chiropractor, and I'm looking at a magazine that the chiropractor's got out, Awesome Chiropractor, and it's talking about how dogs actually go to chiropractors. I did not know this, right? So I'm joking when I'm like, do you fix dogs? He's like, yes. I'm like, really? So my German Shepherd will be going to see the chiropractor. So that's I had no clue that they did that, because I guess there's a lot of working dogs, police dogs. I mean, they get thrown around and all that stuff. So they have to go to the chiropractor and get all that taken care of. So I will let you know how that goes. That was new to me. Other than that, just working on SC200 stuff, and I'll send you guys that link.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Speaking of that, before we go over to Rod, I signed up for the SC100.
Yeah, it's on my list too. I was thinking about doing it Friday. Yeah.
Yeah, well, we're MSST Blue badges, so I didn't even use the beta. We could just sign up, and I did. Let somebody else have that beta code.
Fancy guy.
You don't even need it. Yeah. So, it's only the first 300. And I didn't want to take it for someone else. So I just signed up using, our benefits, and I got it. So I got to sign up for it here in the next 3 weeks, 2 weeks.
You might have to learn how to spell AI API by the time you take that. So
I almost got it.
There's
You
another
have to have
podcast.
I'm looking at my calendar. You have to have the exam completed by the 5th.
Oh yeah, there's time.
For the
Yeah, I got it. So, Rod, short of me bothering the hell out of you the last couple of days.
Yeah,
How
you
you
don't bother
doing?
me. You don't bother me. You help me learn.
Is that so?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. What have I been doing? Nothing. No, I've been actually doing a lot. I'm trying to say nothing because I'm really trying to cope with it. Been really busy. It's just that time of year. Everybody knows at Microsoft. It's that time of year. We're trying to wrap things up, trying to get things shored up, ready for the end of the year. I have time to take off. I can't figure out how I'm going to be able to do that. And then we have fiscal year coming up, so we have to do our QBRs and do all our
Yes.
preparation. I did take SE 100 on Friday though. I wanted to take it Thursday, right the day after it was announced, but I didn't have time, so I took it on Friday in the afternoon. They give you 2.5, 3 hours. I forget what the actual time is for the exam. I finished in 20 minutes. So if that tells you anything, absolutely the skills doc that Microsoft provides, everything on that skills doc is in SC 100. So make sure you look at that. In fact, I'm developing a series for a study guide / study series here to kick off here shortly. So
Yeah. This may amaze you guys, but I actually went through the docs and started reading, and they had recommendations in addition to the prereqs. It's like 4 exams you need to have. You can choose either one, right? AZ5, MS5, SC2, and maybe SC3. If you got either one of those that meets the certification prereq. But as I read down from a study guide, it seems like if you've already passed those exams, it sort of helps you, right? So the texting concepts are not so bad. But I'm going to go through the former doc to go through and actually read it. So I sort of put the AZ 104 on hold. I get back to it after I get back to this, but I have been studying for that. I just
Frank's laughing.
Because Brody's like, look, Edward's going to say we need to do the SC 100 first, so then we can push off the AZ 104. I could just see him saying that.
I don't want to do it.
Is easier. SC 100 is easier out there.
Is it? That's funny. Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah,
network security groups, that yada. Go ahead.
I would think that SC 100 is easier, but remember, it's an architect exam. So if you know this, you're not the one that's doing the work, pushing the buttons. You're the one that's architecting everything. So you guys have already taken the test to actually push the buttons. So I think it should be pretty straightforward for you to take the test.
Do you think you passed?
The other piece of this is you take SC 100 with one of the other ones, AZ 500, MS 500. What's the other ones? SC 200, and you get Architect Expert badge.
Yeah.
So
love being called an expert. Do you think you passed, Rod?
I'm pretty sure I did. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Sweet.
Wow. Look at that right there. He said it just, yeah.
Unless it's so bad, unless the beta is so bad that I just didn't understand anything that I read. So that could happen too.
If Franklin has something to do with creating materials,
I had nothing to do with the content or the exam questions. So
okay.
I was on the JTA for it, which the people that wrote the exam questions screamed at me because it was hard to write the exam questions for an architect, where you're not actually pushing the buttons. It's actually hard to write exam questions on an architect exam because because of the role. So
well, I'm going to put my Mark Simons hat on and be a theorist and not a doer. Shout out to you, Mark. I'm throwing shade on you. I can feel him shooting me the bird through Teams right now. I can feel him doing it right
He listens to our pod. That's awesome. Yeah. It's probably busy.
No, he's stealing ideas because they're trying to figure out how to do theirs. It's all right. You know, Michael, don't go on their podcast. Come to the cool podcast. This is
What do you mean?
man.
I'm one of the people on the other podcast.
Yeah,
Oh, I didn't know that.
In fact, I'm recording tomorrow with Mark. We're doing Cosmos DB, some of the changes in the last year or so.
this is a crossover. This is a
crossover episode.
He knew. He's just messing with you.
He's
That's
messing.
right.
Actually, last week's episode was great. It went over the cybersecurity reference architecture.
Oh my!
talk.
Yeah, we didn't do any news or anything because we knew Mark would just keep rabbiting on. So, and the funny thing is, I had to talk about one item. I mean, it actually was Cosmos DB. I couldn't help it. But yeah, we had no news last week, just to give Mark time to talk about his stuff.
So who are the hosts? Who are the hosts on your show?
So it's the Azure Security Podcast. I mean, it's myself, Mark, Sarah Young, and Gladys Rodriguez. So there's the four of us, and it's really kind of cool because we also come at it from a different perspective, right? My background is mainly application development and security. Sarah does Sentinel, but she's also an AKS expert. As you know, Sarah refers to it as her baby, Sentinel. Gladys comes at it very much from a sort of governance perspective, working with governments, federal agencies. So right now she's very busy with the initiatives that are coming out from the executive orders from the White House, especially now, with the Russia stuff going on. And then Mark, well, who knows what Mark talks about. But no, he does his stuff, right?
Yeah,
Can we trade Brody for someone?
I would get eaten alive over there. Are you kidding me? They're way smarter. Yeah.
Mid-season trade.
I got to meet Gladys last year,
Yep.
and she is really, really, really good. Enjoyed talking to her. I think we're on like the Sentinel office hours or something, and I might have been presenting, and we touched base. So, but yeah, Gladys is a great resource. Always.
Oh,
willing
she's
to help.
fantastic.
Yeah.
She's a great asset to the podcast. Yeah.
Mhm. If you need
Actually,
something-
for those of you not aware, so because she's Hispanic, they actually spun up. I helped them get it all going. It's actually a sort of subfolder off the Azure Security Podcast website, but they have a Spanish edition that they do once a month.
Mhm.
So they cover their own stuff, but in Spanish, which is actually really, really cool. So for any of you out there who are Spanish speakers, native speakers, go look at the Spanish version of the Azure Security Podcast.
Well, we've been talking, but we have not actually introduced who you are.
Oh yeah,
yeah. Who is the guy with the cool accent, but
who's this
actually
interloper?
but actually lives in Texas?
I live in Texas. That's where I live in Austin.
In Austin. So, Michael, without further ado, go ahead and introduce yourself. Tell people what you do at Microsoft, what's your passion, what's cool, and what just yanks your chain.
Oh my God, where do I start? So yeah, I'm Michael Howard. I'm not big on titles, so I'm going to skip the titles, but apparently it's got the word principal somewhere in there. I've been at Microsoft. Actually, in this June, it will be 30 years at Microsoft.
Wow. How big is the crystal for 30
Well,
years?
that one
Yeah.
there is the 25 is the 25 year. That one right there is 25 years.
Love it.
Wow.
I got to tell you the story behind. What's that?
Go ahead. No, go ahead. Then I got
I
something about.
I got to tell you the story behind that thing.
Yeah, please.
You can kill someone with that. I mean,
I bet.
it is lead crystal. It is lead crystal. I think the thing weighs up. I'm going to guess 60 pounds. But this thing arrived at the door. This box. It was huge. And my daughter looks at the door and she's like, "That is for you. What is it?" I'm like, "I have no idea what it is." And so, perhaps it's going to, when's it going to move? And I think it actually contains a dead body. I've got no idea. It is so heavy. So I moved inside the house and opened it up, and inside is one of those black roadie cases. You know, the ones with like the metal edges and the corners and then the wheels underneath it?
Yeah.
We're like, still have no clue what it is, right? And it's really, really heavy. And I think my theory about it being a dead body is actually true. I opened it up, and it's that really, really dense packing foam, like that black, really, really dense foam. And then open it up, and there it is in the middle, just this huge, huge crystal. I mean, it's immense. Yes, that's the 25-year crystal, and the 30 crystal actually looks a little bit like a flame. It's actually really cool because these are very straight lined, right? Whereas the 30-year looks like a flame. So I'm really looking forward to.
What's the story about chocolate?
Chocolate?
for your on your every year that you're at Microsoft, or what's the deal about that?
Oh, the 1 pound of M&Ms.
Yes.
Yeah, it's like a pound of M&Ms for every year, so it's 30 pounds. It'll be 30 pounds for me, and got to go out and buy 30 pounds of M&Ms. Yeah, that's the old story. Yeah,
I was talking to someone the other day. They had 22 pounds of M&Ms in their drawer, waiting for people to come back to the office. So,
yeah, please, yeah, waiting for Halloween. But I'm thankful for those people who signed up at Microsoft around Halloween, right?
Oh, good thing we have good benefits. You're gonna need to go to the dentist after 30 pounds of M&Ms.
I know.
Yeah.
But
Well, 30 years of anything is commendable, right? Because most of the time when I associate 30 years, I can count the things on one hand. I'm done. Raise kids, live. I've never worked anywhere near that close. I got over halfway there in my first marriage. And hopefully I'll get there in the second one. Matter of fact, if there is no hope, I will in my second one, right?
Good man.
And off in time for
obviously his wife's listening to this.
Yeah, she's just upstairs. Yeah.
There you go, right? But hey, man, congrats. I knew of you, but I did not know you until I was encouraged to interact with you through one of my peers, Beth, and she said, you got to get him on. He's one of the best storytellers, and he just takes it, and he has perspective, right? Rather than, he doesn't sound like a theorist, he sounds like a historian about telling things that were going on. That's sort of her thing. I'm like, I like a good storyteller.
You bring up a really interesting point. So just to sort of really quickly just give a quick round out about my background. So, and then I'll come into the story aspect. So I started at Microsoft in New Zealand, supporting the C compiler on Windows. And the only reason I was doing that is because I was the only person who understood what the internals of Windows were and what a C compiler was. But back then it was like, Microsoft C version 4. I mean, we didn't even have a decent debugger back then until actually, no, we did. Version 4 had code view, and that was our first visual debugger. So I started doing that, and then I started getting into security, ended up moving to Redmond, working on IIS, but I spent some time working on Windows NT was back in the day, on security as well. So some of that, low-level goo, ACLs, SIDs, tokens, privileges, all that sort of, goop. And then I moved into IIS, and that was a long story. And I ended up doing security on that as well. That's actually a bit of it's a bit of an interesting story there. But I was the security PM for IIS 3, 4, 5, and 6. 3, 4, 5, not the greatest from a security standpoint. Let's just say we learned a lot. And then IIS 6 is where we basically re-engineered the whole thing from the ground up. Totally went from the ground up. Different architecture, brand new code, learned a heck of a lot. And that was, was installed on, actually wasn't installed. It was available with Windows Server 2003, but it was not installed, unlike IIS 5, which is installed by default in Windows 2000. And so we learned a heck of a lot, and I learned a heck of a lot too, basically through a baptism of fire. I mean, I'm not kidding. Continue then there was this realization that to a lot of people, security is all about features, right? Firewalls, anti-malware, endpoint protection, Java VM, all that sort of good stuff, right? Well, my focus, because of what I'd learned in IIS, was that stuff's important, but there's nothing to compare to, say, a good design, a secure design and secure code. And so I ended up spending a lot of time on coding, and being a C person. My background was in C, and now C++. Well, back then C++. Although I still have a soft spot for C++. And and just about everything in Microsoft at the time was written in C and C++. Just about everything. In fact, even back then, C++ was really just glorified C, which I won't go unless you really want to. That's never a good idea. So. We found all these issues, and a lot of them have been sparked because of IIS, which I'd worked on, and Bill was yelling at me, Bill Gates, that is. And
Heard of him?
You heard of him?
Yeah.
So David LeBlanc and I wrote this little book called Writing Secure Code. Really kind of interesting. So David was in Office, and I was in Windows, and back then Windows and Office hated each other. And David said to me one day, said, have you noticed that we're getting the same security questions every day in and day out? And I'm like, yeah. So why don't we write a book? So I was like, that's a good idea. Let's write a book. So we wrote this book, Writing Secure Code, and December 2001 is when it came out. and I had a meeting with Bill to go over security vulnerabilities, and I handed a copy of the book to Bill. It was actually one of the first copies to come off the press. It was on a Friday, and he emailed me on the Monday and said he'd read the book and loved it, absolutely loved it. So David and I ended up writing the second edition, which weighed in at 815 pages. It was more, a buddy of mine actually told me a few weeks after it came out. He said, "Running School Code second edition, best book I have. It's by a long shot the best book ever." I'm like, "Oh, that's really, really kind." He said, "Yeah." I said, "I've got this table, and one of the legs is this short, so it's perfect." Like, I mean, who needs enemies, right? When you got friends like that. But the point I want to try and get at is one thing that I've learned over the years, because I've literally seen everything. I mean, everything. I was in charge back then with my boss and I, a gentleman by the name of Steve Lipner, and I. We ended up going to basically the senior management, the senior leadership at Microsoft, including Bill, with this idea of saying, "Look, we've really got to sort of move the ship." We're writing. We've got a lot of bleeding. There's a lot of code that's being written that could be, let's just say, could be better. And we ended up inventing this thing called the Security Development Lifecycle, the SDL, and the rest, as they say, is kind of history. But there's a lot that we learned, doing all that stuff. And one thing that I think is really critical for people who are in security is to learn how to tell stories, because it's all very well saying, hey, you really shouldn't be doing something this way. You should be doing it that way. And then someone pushes back and says, no, we're going to do it this way anyway. And then you pull a little story out of your grab bag and it's, well, let me tell you the time, the Internet Explorer team did that. And let me explain how that worked out for them. Right. Or, you can pick anything, right? The JVM or, whatever, Oracle database, there's plenty of stories, right? So that's one thing I really do like to focus on a lot is stories, because sometimes you have to back a decision up with real life experience, and a story, there's no better way of doing it than a story.
Yeah,
no doubt.
I agree.
Relate. Yeah.
Yeah, I like to be able to try to convey an idea based on past experience, good or bad,
Yep.
right? But just stay neutral in the telling of the story, so it doesn't seem like I'm biased either way. But I got a quick question for you. You've been around a long time. Am I mistaken? Didn't you and Mark Ravanovich do something together a while back? I could have swore I saw you two together.
Rasinovich?
Yeah.
No, I mean, he and I did some work back in the early Windows days, but
Okay.
nothing on Azure. No.
Yeah, and you're right. I used to be I fancied myself back in the day. I was going to be this web guy, right? And I remember getting my first series of certifications. Remembering you could get MCP plus I with IIS, and it used to be IIS heavy. But you were right. I remember that it wasn't installed by default anymore. It ended up being was it a role or a feature when you added on the thing?
Yeah, whatever. Like it's a server thingamabob, right? But the key thing is it wasn't installed by default, which meant that it can't be attacked by default if there's a vulnerability. Right. Compared to IIS, which was installed in Windows 2000 by default, which means that even if you're not using it, you've got yourself a web server. And if there's a vulnerability in the web server, then you can get whacked. I mean, that's one of the reasons why Nimda and Code Red were so prevalent worms, is because IIS 4 and 5 were installed by default. Well, especially 5 was installed by default. And in fact, even when you installed IIS 6, you basically got a web server that just served up static files. It didn't do ASP.NET. It didn't do password change. It didn't do this, that, or that, or the other. And it listened on a very, very small subset of verbs, like basically get and post. Whereas, IIS 5 did, all the web dev verbs as well, like prop, put, prop, get, patch, all those other, web dev verbs that frankly, everyone's forgotten about. But yeah, so those code paths were never exposed. Even when you installed the server, if you wanted to use WebDAV, you had to opt in for WebDAV. Everything was opt in, which in hindsight was actually completely the right decision.
Yeah.
So,
you go ahead, Frank.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Do you find the vulnerabilities that are being discovered today is more on the legacy code or the new code inside Windows? And the real issue that Windows has is the legacy code and should just be gone. Do you agree with that statement? Or
oh man, I wish it was a simple yes or no. So I'm going to be careful what I say, not because I want to break into jail, but because I want to make sure I'm accurate here. So, we put in a lot of effort to help clean up the code base, right, around insecure APIs, replacing them with secure versions. I work very heavily with the compiler guys, the C++ guys, to help them emit more secure code. I could spend hours just on that topic alone. We spent time with Microsoft Research, helping them build, or giving them ideas about what tools to build to find vulnerabilities in the code. And what's interesting is there became a point where I actually publicly said, I think all the low-hanging fruit is gone. In other words, the really stupid, boneheaded things are just gone. The problem is now the hard work starts, right? Because now we've got the really complex bugs to find, like the race conditions that cause a memory corruption because of the race condition, or a loop that loops one too many times after you've freed an object, but you can't really detect it really easily using static or dynamic, well, possibly dynamic analysis. But that's where the hard work really starts. So, do we see vulnerabilities in old code? I mean, absolutely. But a lot of them are really, really hard. And when I say hard, I mean really hard to spot. So I'll give you an example what I mean by that. Many years ago, I used to do all the root cause analysis for security vulnerabilities that were fixed as part of Patch Tuesday. Like, what happened? Why did we miss this? Is there a pattern here? That kind of stuff. And I said to senior management, I said, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to take the root cause analysis for a couple of them, and I'm going to clean them all up. Get rid of internal resources and names and what have you, and make it publicly available. And the PR folks and the lawyers are like, no, you're not. I'm like, no, come on. Look, I'm not completely stupid. Give me the opportunity to do it. I will give you guys the draft documents. You guys have first rights of refusal. And they said, yep, okay. So what I did was I put the first one out, and it was an interesting little thing, because I said, here's this vulnerability that we patched. And by the way, there was also a time delta between when the patch was issued and me publishing the data, just to make sure that, there's ample time for people to apply patches. So I don't want to put any customers at risk.
Right.
And so I said, here's this vulnerability, blah, 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 blah. Here's the code. And by the way, here's the 2 lines of the code out of 150 lines of code where the vulnerability manifests itself. And only these 2 lines of code are actually involved in the vulnerability. I've removed everything else. So you have the benefits of knowing where the 2 lines are that cause the vulnerability. So where's the bug? And I did that kind of on purpose to show that some of this stuff isn't easy. It isn't easy. And by the way, the issue was with this one was there's 2 arrays, and I swapped the indexes over. So rather than indexing one using like I, and the other one using J, a variable index offsets, I actually switched them. And that was actually the vulnerability. These indexes got switched, which is, was hard to spot. And so the net result was really kind of interesting, because we actually said, look, here's what we learned from this. Here's what we're going to change in our process. Here's why this part of the SDL didn't find it. Here's why this part of the SDL didn't find it. Here's why this part of the SDL didn't find it. But here's the change that we're making to the compiler to automatically put defenses in place to prevent that sort of thing from actually being exploitable.
Nice.
So it's always a good news story at the end. And in fact, what's really interesting there is that you can actually take old code and use the modern versions of most importantly, the C and C++ compiler, and you'll get a whole bunch of these defenses for free. So for example, in Visual C++ today, there's a /SDL switch, security development lifecycle. It's a single switch. And that will actually turn on a whole bunch of defenses. And by the way, that is enabled by default. You've got to go in and turn it off. In fact, even if you go CL, which is the compiler, and go CL space foo.cpp, you will actually get those defenses for free. You actually got to opt out. So I don't even know. What was your question again?
It's all right. So I got another question for you. You don't have to answer this one.
That was really interesting, by the way. That was really cool how transparent you were, like, on that whole process. That was
well.
Really
the thing
cool.
is, you've got to make it easy. You've got to make it frictionless, right? If security is really, really hard, people won't do it. So why not just make this stuff for free? Now, don't get me wrong. You can't just like generate code that's going to run 10 times slower. You obviously can't do that, right? So you got to make sure that whatever you're doing creates more secure code, but at the same time, even in .NET, right? .NET 6 has a whole bunch of memory corruption stuff called write XOR execute that's enabled by default. It was not there in prior versions of .NET. And you get that defense for free for doing nothing other than upgrading to .NET 6.
Well, let me ask a quick
go on.
question before Frank jumps in. So I believe now that I can remember our first encounter, sort of 3 degrees of separation. Are you the owner of the security development lifecycle tool at Microsoft?
I was one of the owners of the SDL process at Microsoft for a long time. I mainly looked after 2 areas. Unmanaged C and C++, so all the memory corruption stuff, which frankly is where is the hotbed, right? And then the other one was all the cryptographic requirements around which algorithms you can use, which padding modes, which block modes, where to get keys from, how to store keys, all that sort of good stuff. Yeah, that's why I own. So Steve and I sort of hatched this with a bunch of other folks. Don't get me wrong, there's many people involved. Just happened that Steve and I wrote the book called The Security Development Lifecycle. So everyone sort of attributes us to it, but there's many other people involved. A lot of it was under the leadership of our general manager at the time was Mike Nash. And Scott Charney was another one. He was the head of Trustworthy Computing. And obviously we got sign off from Bill and what have you. But yeah, I owned for the longest time, for very close to a decade, the crypto requirements and the unmanaged code requirements in the SDL. So everything across Microsoft. Yeah.
Cool.
Franklin, you got a question, sir?
So I don't ask this question because I don't want to change topics, but it's slightly off topic. What do you think about doesn't Google, like, if there's a vulnerability, they're like, hey, we're going to tell you, then you got 30 days to get it fixed, right, and then we're going to announce it to the world. What's your take on that whole thing?
Yeah, it's not just a Google thing. I mean, everyone kind of does it, to a certain point. My own opinion on this, and this is my personal take on it, is I think data about these kinds of things should be announced. I think we should learn from it. We should learn from vulnerabilities, right? It doesn't matter what it is. We shouldn't be hiding vulnerabilities. We should be learning from them as we move forward. I have no problem with disclosing whatever needs to be done, so long as customers are safe. I'm going to leave it at that. So long as customers are safe, that is critically important to me. That's paramount. So anything that puts customers at risk I'm not a fan of. That's about as diplomatic as I'm going to get today.
Nice. Good call out.
So I have a new headset, and I've been told in the background, Brody's like, "Hey man, every time you move your headset, it's making it sound terrible."
I haven't heard a thing. I don't know what he's talking about.
I haven't either.
He just doesn't want you to talk.
It has something to do with that crap on his wall.
I'm distracted.
Right. Yeah. So let me ask a question that's down the line, but not necessarily related. What are your thoughts around bug bounties? Because it seems to be that everybody thinks that this is a thing to go do, right? And I'm like, dude, you got to be skilled to do this stuff, right?
To find the bugs or to have the bug bounty? No, you don't need to be very skilled to have a bug bounty, but finding the bugs, you definitely have to be skilled. Yeah, absolutely.
Isn't it different between API-based bug bounty versus Windows bug bounty, and the way that you're finding or researching for that? Isn't that kind of 2 different worlds?
And it's really interesting that you bring up APIs, because we've almost seen a resurgence. It's almost like the 1990s called and want their vulnerabilities back, and they're all manifesting in REST APIs. We're seeing people get these REST APIs done lickety split and not putting appropriate discipline around the code and the design of those REST endpoints. There's a website called APIsecurity.io, and I get a newsletter from them every week. And it's kind of it's sad. It's like, so you're telling me this API's got a SQL injection vulnerability on it? Like, really? Right. You find issues, in different ways. So actually, in the interest of full disclosure there, and in fact, this is the first time it's actually been publicly announced. So myself, Mark, Heinrich Gantenbein, and Simone Kurtzi were writing a new book for Microsoft Press called Designing and Developing Secure Azure Solutions. And one of the chapters, which is meant to be 25 pages long, so 58 pages later, is on secure development, but from an Azure perspective, right? So, I touch on C and C++ just because I can't help myself, but there's still a lot of, higher level constructs in there as well. C#. I even got Rust examples in there as well, and Go and Python and Java and JavaScript. By the way, there are no words in the English dictionary to explain how much I despise JavaScript. But anyway,
I said if JavaScript ever became the standard, I would retire. So that's because I hate it so much.
Yeah, it's not that. It's like it's become like the early 21st century's replacement for Perl, right? Which is like a write-only language.
Wow.
So once you've written it, you can never read it ever again. Anyway,
that's why you have TypeScript, right?
I love TypeScript. Absolutely love TypeScript, right? Because, and in fact, that's the reason why I don't like JavaScript. I'm not just going to be all emotional about it and just say I don't like JavaScript. The reason why I don't like it is it's, in my opinion, it's unmaintainable. Once you get to a certain size, you just can't maintain that stuff. It's not designed to be I've yet to come across a single customer that feels like they can adequately maintain their JavaScript code once it reaches a certain size. I don't know what that size is, but it's, it's beyond the sort of, toy project. Don't get me wrong. I mean, there's jQuery and there's all these big other, these big libraries. But yeah, TypeScript is way better when it comes to being maintainable and manageable and correct. And the word I like to use all the time is, correct. Because I'm a huge fan of strong typing, which JavaScript doesn't have. And the fact that there's a book called JavaScript, the Good Bits means where's the book that's JavaScript, the bad bits? Because there's obviously a lot of them. And there is. It's got these really funky idioms that drive me completely bonkers and help you write, incorrect code. And I just don't like that. Anyway, how do we get onto this topic? Oh, that's right. APIs. So a big section of this one chapter is actually on API security. And it's so funny because you actually read a lot of websites and they talk about API security, and it's always the same stuff. Make sure you have like OpenID Connect for authentication and you use OAuth 2 correctly and you protect your JOT tokens. Yeah, I covered that in this chapter as well, but it's like a page. The rest of it is like fuzzing endpoints. Like it's like basically lobbing crap at endpoints to see how they react. And I like a way of actually, so Simone in the threat modeling chapter of the book lays out this scenario. Mm-hmm. Then what I do is I take this one part of the threat model and say, okay, we're now going to test the APIs that are associated with this endpoint in the threat model. And here's how we're going to do it. And a lot of it's all about fuzzing, right? So understanding what the data is that this endpoint expects, and then intelligently corrupting that data to see how the code reacts. And don't get me wrong, have strong authentication and authorization around the endpoint, but the code has to be correct as well. And people have, and I'm not kidding, you actually go and look at anything on the web, on the internet that talks about API security. It's all about, OpenID Connect and OAuth 2. It's not about the code. It's not about the code being correct.
Well, a lot of the bug bounty training programs out there focus on API security and scanning and fuzzing and all that. So, which I'm horrible at. I'm great on the endpoint, horrible on the API side. So, does the API management inside Azure help out in any way, or is that just standard? What's the deal with that? Isn't there a service inside Azure?
Yeah, there's the API management, but if you send malformed junk to an API, REST API, the API management gateway is probably just going to let it through, because it's not there to sort of change the data on the fly, right? It doesn't know what the business logic looks like, or
Is there any Defender product out there that helps look for the fuzzing or anything strange going on?
We have we have various Defender products that can certainly help in this area. But honestly, I think, the answer really is no. And let me caveat that. If you fuzz some data, and let me give a real example. So the bug that led to Slammer in SQL Server, and I realize this is C code, but humor me. So the bug was found by a good friend of mine named David Litchfield. Actually, he and I were talking just recently about this bug, and I actually asked him point blank, how did you find it? I kind of knew how he found it, but how do you find it? What was interesting is, so the bug actually wasn't in SQL Server. The bug was actually in the SQL Server management services, which listens on port 1434, UDP 1434, not TCP 1433, which is SQL Server. And basically found that when data was going, across the wire to this UDP 1434, it seemed to have a certain shape. And basically what it was like the first byte was a verb and the rest of it was a payload. And that payload was interpreted depending on what the verb was. He found that if you actually set, just think about it in terms of an API gateway for a minute. So he found that if you actually set that verb to a certain number, like that 1 byte to a certain number, then the payload was n bytes long, let's say 200 bytes long. He got memory corruption. So the point is, I mean, would a gateway stop that? I mean, does the gateway know that if it's the number 9?
Yeah, but it's the pattern that you're seeing and the fuzzing pattern that you're seeing.
Yeah,
more than it is actually the content that's being seen. But also, a lot of times when people fuzz, they're using, they're definitely using patterns out there to figure out the location for the overflow situation going on. So I'd have to think that that's pretty standard pattern that something could watch for.
It is, but the point I'm trying to make here, and I think this is really important. In fact, this is something we say in chapter 1, which I'm working on right now, is you can't abdicate the security of your, in this case, REST endpoint, REST API. You cannot abdicate the security of that REST endpoint to a tool. You can't say, I can write any crap I want and then just have an API gateway in front of me and a WAF and I'm golden. It's like, no, you're not.
It compiles. It's fine. What are you talking about?
That's right. It compiles and links with no warnings. It's exactly right. It's ready to ship. No, you can't do that. You just can't. I mean, should you have an API gateway? Yes. Should you have a WAF? Yes. Should you probably use, a front door? Yes. If you got a very high-end endpoint, should be, with a public IP address, should you be using, denial of, the Microsoft DDoS protections that go above and beyond what's in the baseline level in the underlying infrastructure? Yes. But you also need to make sure your code isn't complete junk. And that's why fuzz testing is so important, right? In fact, there's a line I actually have in that chapter where I break it out from the rest of the chapter, which is basically, can you, in good conscience, claim that your APIs will resist everything that we've just talked about? It's all about mangling stuff and blowing stuff up and what have you. Have you ever tried lobbing insecure data or incorrect data at your endpoints and see how it responts? I bet the answer is no.
There's plenty of tools out there for you to do it. So
yeah, I was asking that. Porchwigger maybe if you're on the outside, to take a look at stuff. Burp
Suite. Yep.
Yeah. What about
there's other tools? Yeah, there's other tools out there that you can use.
I'm even more low level than that. I actually write some PowerShell code and some C# code.
Right. So people write their own custom stuff, but then there's also other ones out there. There's ones to do SQL injection, fuzzing, SQL injection. So just real quick, there's also a Microsoft research project called Wrestler, which is up on GitHub, which is exactly for fuzzing REST endpoints as well. Yeah. Cool. So, are you seeing most of the failures right now? Well, I'm going to kind of cross technologies here. Where do you see containers fitting into this, and where you're seeing most of the vulnerabilities that people are exploiting, or where do you see most of the failures right now? Is it just straight up code that people are writing that's residing with inside containers, or is it true? Where is it?
Well, that's a difficult topic to unpack. So let me just kind of try. In terms of like real life failures, I still see a lot of issues with just straight up bad design. I'll give you an example, right? It's like, where's the key stored? For encrypting something. Well, it's in a file. Well, where's the file? What's over there? Well, how's that protected? Well, it's encrypted. Well, where's the key stored? In Key Vault. Well, who has access to the key? We don't know. All right, so what's the RBAC policy on the Key Vault? That's why threat modeling is so important. I had this conversation today with a customer. It was almost identical to what I just said. So, and in fact, it was even worse. This is a large company, and the data they're dealing with is pretty sensitive. And it's like, so how do you get? How do I know that this REST endpoint is allowed access? Well, we have a key that's associated with the REST endpoint that then calls this particular queue, and then the queue calls out to the database. Well, how do you know it's the correct REST APIs? Well, we have this API key. Well, where's that stored? Well, it's stored over there. Well, how is it protected? We don't know. Okay. So it's just simple design stuff, right? And that's in the threat model.
Yeah. How did you like Dynamics portals or whatever, their API situation? I don't know if you saw that or not about a year or so ago.
What was that?
I guess that they just basically left an API free to open,
right,
anyone to call it, and then it had access to whatever it shouldn't have.
But that's another interesting point, though, is do you know all your APIs? Do you know have you got an enumeration of all your APIs, and what's going to stop Brody from just spinning up another one, right?
So
do you find that your attackable surface area is expanded by multiple cloud solutions? Because the way or is it uniform? If I could secure my API and come up with a plan, is it something that can be written that could be, I have yet, especially now since cloud is no longer a new thing, to see someone who's single cloud in some form or fashion.
Yeah.
Everybody's using it. Yeah.
I
So
mean,
how do you address that? Is it starting at the top, starting at the bottom with the lowest common denominator and say, this is how you go about your business, whether you're doing it Oracle, GCP, AWS, Azure? I had a customer that was still allowing they had no CI/CD at all. They were just allowing the people to check in code from their machines. They had no protection.
Humans should never be allowed in prod, period. That should all be done through a CI/CD.
I love that line. I'm going to save that.
No, I'm serious. I'm actually really, really serious. And I was working with a customer, and they had this notion, a healthcare customer, and they had this design principle, which was no standing access. Nobody, and in fact, there's nobody, nothing, right? And so even to push out to the CI/CD pipeline required essentially, elevation to be able to push out from the CI/CD pipeline. So everything was tightly controlled. I love that. And that's why you often end up having multiple CI/CD pipelines as well. One pushes out stuff like databases and key vaults and network security groups and all that sort of stuff. Then another one pushes out security policies like RBAC policies and objects and that sort of stuff. And another pipeline pushes out keys and secrets, and they don't talk to each other, and they can't talk to each other. So you have this separation of duties. So that way, and in fact, what's really, really cool is if you look at something like Azure SQL DB, it has the ability to have a security officer who's not a database officer. So you can set RBAC policies on Azure SQL DB, but you can't read the data. And a database admin can't set RBAC policies. And then for encryption of the data, encryption of columns, say, for example, with always encrypted, well, the cool thing is that SQL Server doesn't even need a key when it's using always encrypted, because the crypto is not done by SQL Server, it's done by the client. But if you're doing column encryption, then the key, it has to be readable by SQL Server, but configuring it is done by a different pipeline that can write to Key Vault. It can't read. And SQL Server can read, but it can't write. And database admins, they can't do anything. So you have this really fascinating separation of duties, right? So things need to be built and designed that way. And I know for a fact I've still not answered anybody's question yet. So, you go on.
So how, from a proper design standpoint, I'm surprised how many people don't understand the concept of managed identities. So tell me more about managed identities and how you see that fitting in. Yeah.
So from a client, then this is really important, right? So from a client's authentication perspective, managed identities rule the roost in Azure. Generally, managed identities are the correct answer for client's authentication.
Do you do system or user assign?
It can be either. It depends. Like, for example, if you want to share a managed identity across multiple VMs, then you're going to use, a custom one, a user assign. You're not going to use a system assign one. Either, I'm fine. There are pros and cons to each, but from a security perspective, they're pretty much on par with each other compared to a service principal, right? So a service principal, you must store the credential somewhere. So where do you store the credential? Well, we store it in Key Vault. Okay, now who is that? What's the RBAC policy on that allows you to access that principal? So I like to say it's like turtles all the way down, right? So eventually, at some point, There has to be something we say, okay, that's fine, that's perfect. So managed identities, one of the beauties of managed identities, either system assigned or user assigned, is that the credential is managed by AAD, Azure Active Directory. It's not managed by you. And so when, let's say, for example, let's say you have a virtual machine that has a managed identity on it, when Azure spins up that VM, because we know when we're spinning it up, right? We associate with the identity with it automatically. You don't. You have no access to the credential, and we rotate the credential and protect the credentials in AAD. You don't. You don't have to store them. And that's why managed identities are so cool, because I'm not storing a credential anywhere.
So that managed identity then can access Key Vault to go and get access to other things, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay.
And in fact, we did this with the same customer I was talking to before, who had this notion of no standing access. They had a VM that ran very, very specialized workload to talk to Azure SQL DB. And we gave the VM a managed identity. And so when their code made the connection out, SQL Server saw the connection coming in from the VM managed identity. Let's say it's called VM foo, right? So they saw a connection coming in from VM foo, and all the RBAC policy allowed VM foo to read, right? Or insert data, or whatever CRUD operations were required. That's really cool, because that way, when the VM comes up, there's no credential I'm pulling in from anywhere. I don't have to worry about protecting the credential.
Right.
That's what the attackers go after, right? They don't break crypto, for example. They find the keys. And it's a similar principle here. They go looking for the principal for the credentials for the account. Well, in this case, it's all managed by AAD.
When you're dealing with Azure storage, because obviously storage is an area. So basically, you're using a managed identity to access the storage instead of the other ways of accessing storage.
Yeah, but now
what's the proper way?
Yeah, and so now you got to turn on RBAC controls in storage, right? Because by default, it's gonna expect like a SAS token or something, right? That's kind of the default. So you got to turn on AAD authentication and authorization. So once you turn that on for the storage account, you can now start using managed identities, just user accounts, right? And restricting access that way. And in fact, if you go one step further, if you're using ADLS Gen 2, so Azure Data Lake Storage Gen 2, there's a thing they have in there called POSIX 1003.1 ACLs, access control lists, which will allow really fine, very granular access. So you can actually go down to like individual files and restrict access. Whereas if you're just using like AAD at the data plane, you're going to put it on, probably going to put it on a folder. The access control.
Yeah. You also have to do all the networking thing, cutting off from the public world. So let's just assume that I'm a manager, and I've been watching this. I say, okay, I want to go to my development team and ask them 3 to 5 questions just to get a feel where they're at with security. What are those 3 to 5 questions I should ask them?
Where are your threat models? Okay, number one, where are your threat models?
Okay.
And the reason for that is, if you have a good threat model, I was doing a threat modeling exercise today for this company I was talking about. And it was really interesting because we found stuff that they kind of knew, but we made it very, very explicit that these were not good. These issues were not good. I'm gonna leave it there. I know you said 3 to 5, but the other thing that's a really important trait, I think, in security is knowing when to pick your battles. Sure, I can give you 5. But why give you 5 when I can give you 1 that's really, really, really good, right? So where are your threat models? What are you doing around secure design? I could keep going, right? How do you protect your CI/CD pipeline? What tools do you use to, what education do you have in place to make sure the engineering staff know how to build secure software? I could keep going, but I think the big one is threat models.
Are you happy with the recent federal mandates regarding secure code infrastructure, securing the overall, what's the term I'm looking for, supply chain based on recent events that have occurred? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I actually worked quite some time, actually it was a long time ago now, with the Department of Homeland Security, cybersecurity division on supply chain stuff. But there's also a group called SafeCode, which was set up by industry a long time ago, and they have a supply chain document as well around supply chain mitigations. I do like, don't get me wrong, anything that gets people's attention, I'm all for that. That's just great. And in fact, I've been looking through the executive order, and the parts that affect sort of what I do make complete sense. They also made complete sense 10 years ago and 20 years ago.
You have to understand that every single time a new president comes in, there's another executive order talking about the same thing over and over again. It seems like it's never dealt with, never funded. The next president comes in, we get another executive order.
And it's reactionary, right? It's reactionary based on solar, wind, et cetera.
So I hear, okay, there's this new executive order, right? The only thing that I'm seeing is that I think will make a difference is, I guess, CMMC, is it called?
Maturity model.
So, I mean, from getting people really, organizations moving forward on that.
I don't know. I'll be honest with you, I don't know. I mean, call me old, grumpy, and cynical. I've been called much worse. But I've worked with customers where I've actually tongue-in-cheek said, "So why do you care about this now? Either A, you got whacked, B, your shareholders are telling you to do it, or C, all of the above." Because a lot of people don't do this proactively because they see it just as a tax they have to pay, that may or may not pay off. The problem is you have to have these safeguards in place. You can't just go writing junky software.
Yeah.
But the problem is we make it sound like it's really, really hard to make good quality software, like secure software. By the way, quality software does not mean secure software. That's a whole nother discussion. But people need to focus on that stuff. But when you've got to get stuff out tomorrow, sometimes security just falls by the wayside. So you really got to make it as frictionless as possible. You go on, Matt.
So, I mean, one of the things is I used to use Dynamics 365 as an app dev platform, right? The CRM side, right? And the main reason being is the fact that I want Microsoft to be responsible for that level of writing the secure code.
Sure.
Right?
Yep.
Versus me going out and writing custom code.
Right.
So I would sit there and try to explain to customers, right? And say, listen, they're like, oh, this license, that license. I'm like, yeah, but if you want, the risk of having somebody write custom code for you that you think is out of savings, it's just not worth it. Go out, do something in the Power Platform, and let Microsoft deal with that level of secure code. Obviously, there's still security on top of that has to be managed, right? But at that level, I'm going to let Microsoft worry about that, and it's worth the licensing cost to have that happen. But a lot of people don't understand that.
I agree with that on the understanding that it's still a shared responsibility model. It's not everything's on Microsoft's plate at all. I mean, there's a blog post that I wrote a while ago that showed how to have a SQL injection vulnerability in a Logic app, right? Where
but there's instead of me writing a custom app that's just me, that the chance I'm going to do a buffer overflow versus the community side and the Microsoft side supporting that. There's you don't want me writing the code. No. That's the bottom line.
Yeah, I agree 100% with that. Yeah.
Well, you said something, Michael, that you said instead of giving you 5, I'll give you 1, and that 1 is very significant. But I think there should be at least one more. Continual testing, right? Sure. How do you test your controls, right? Are you in an echo room, echo chamber, where you're like, oh yeah, we're safe, and coming up with a framework that is non-corruptible. Because sometimes if the same people that are testing the code are the ones that are writing it,
right,
it's got to ship. The stuff's got to ship. So, I generally, for the most part, in my limited sphere of being out, is that people have pen tests twice a year, maybe, right? And they're still not testing the things. I find that pen testers test what they're strong at, right? Because they can always find this. But to find a company that says, let us look at it from the time you write your first 1 and 0 to the time that this thing goes production, there are some, but it's hard. And then they're not cheap.
Well, so I have a very philosophical position on pen tests. Pen tests should not find anything at all. Like, they shouldn't be there to find bugs. They're there to make sure that you did all the right things. Like, a good pen test should find nothing. You shouldn't be doing a pen test to find something. It's not there to do your security work for you, because it's too late anyway. But you're absolutely right. I mean, security should be an ongoing process, and that's the beauty of CI/CD pipelines, right? Is that I can actually add at least some baseline tooling of those in those pipelines to at least do some basic testing, right? So, for example, if someone rolls out an ARM template that doesn't have authentication turned on for, I don't know, a storage account, or TLS for a storage account, for example, I should be able to catch that, right? Or perhaps even have Azure policy in place. That's, by the way, that's another thing I love about Azure, right? Is Azure policy. Is the fact that I can just deny bad stuff. I can say, hey, if you want to roll out a storage account, then it has to have TLS enabled, as an example.
Yeah.
And that becomes your governance model. So governance is critically important as well. Every time I've seen something really, really nasty happen with a customer and they've added Azure policy, the reason why it slipped through is because the policy was set to audit and not to deny. And no one was watching the audit logs. So remember, collection, right? Collection is not detection.
Right.
Just because you're collecting the logs doesn't mean you're finding anything.
Someone's got to review it.
I say it all the time. I think the first time I heard that, I was in Israel when the guy said it, and I'm like, that's absolutely true. But trying to get customers, like I have a prime customer now, it's like, you're in a great place as you switch your log aggregator from this to Sentinel to go out and rationalize and validate every log that you're bringing in.
Right.
Who told you to do it? How long have you been doing it? Why are you doing it? And what are you doing with the process? So I like to go with those non-technicals to sit here and they go, well, I just thought I've been doing it this way.
Right.
Is that right? Okay. So you're right. There's not an easy way. I see, for any of the developers that are listening to us, this is your chance. I believe that your most effective security people are going to start coming from the developer world. They get to see it.
Well, actually, so I get asked this question a lot. It's like, so where do we go and hire the best people? And so, like, the best people to hire are the people who currently work for you. It's probably someone who actually really kind of gets it, kind of understands it, or perhaps has that little nugget of, that little spark about security. Nurture that person, right, and make them your security people internally, and have them drive the program. Sure, you can go and hire somebody, but it's such a competitive marketplace. You may as well just grow someone inside the organization. In fact, I added that to chapter 1 too, by the way.
Okay.
They're the best people. Now, here's the problem, though. Here's the problem. It's how do you retain them?
Exactly. You can grow them, but then do they stick around, right?
Like, boom, IR hacker now. I'm a hacker now, right? It's like, I'm going to go and get a job in a pen test organization and make $250,000 a year versus the $100,000 you're paying me. Well, that's a real problem.
It's for organizations to understand that attrition control is not necessarily work-life balance. It's not necessarily those are super important. It's the ability for the person to create an opportunity for themselves. Like, hey, if we don't have an internal validation, security control, SDLA, I'll run that team,
right,
and start building it out. I still believe that, the people that are in charge of security have no interest in security. Like, my biggest pet peeve is I don't like the CISO role, because often the CISO role reports to somebody else who can override them. I always believe that CISO should be right. It should never work for the CIO. They should be peers, right? Yep. And God forbid a CISO works for the CFO.
Which you're seeing, right?
Which I'm seeing a lot of, and I'm like, I was like, you need, and I don't even like the term CISO. I believe you need a chief security officer, because the CIO is in charge of the information that makes the line of business. My job is the chief security officer. Now, does that include physical security and some of the other stuff? Who knows? But I'm here to secure how you do your line of business. And people are reluctant to insert that CISO role in an equal peering with the other C-suites, because you're going to delay my business.
Right. Yeah. And there's another little philosophy that I've always had, which is if you're in a security role, you got to pick your battles, right? Some things, are you willing to die on the hill for that one? And there's some things, I used to, we have a thing, we used to call the Windows war room. Apparently it's now called the Windows ship room. Because every day we'd meet and we'd go through like the really, really hard questions, like the go, no go on features. I mean, the really, really hard decisions on a day-to-day basis. And I would go every now and then, and I was always seen as like the angel of death, right? The only reason I'm there is because I've got some bad security news, right? And I would sometimes just go with nothing, just to see people react. It's like, well, why is Michael here? It's like, we're not shipping today.
Is that bomber giving you that look?
No. I mean, it was interesting. But one thing that I learned from the ship room more than anything else is to pick my battles. I mean, I could literally fight every single battle and prevent everything. I'm not going to say I had that hammer to stop things from shipping, but my opinion carried some weight. If I say we can't do that, right? But the reason why the ship room would listen is because I always pick my battles, right? I didn't go and say, "Oh yeah, can't do that." But this is
nagging.
Right? It's like, this is an admin only attack. It's like it'd be different if it was like someone on the internet could take advantage of this, but it's an admin only attack. Can we fix this? Right after this product ships, or are you going to hold up the product because of this? You got to be able to make those decisions. And unfortunately, I think a lot of security people go in with this mentality of, I'm going to stop, my job is to stop you from shipping. I had a customer just recently, it was a bank, large bank, and security was holding this particular product up. And basically it was all to do with key sizes for key wrapping. And it was interesting that if you actually took the absolute letter of the bank's requirements, we're out of compliance. But when you stick to the spirit of the compliance requirements, we were fine. Basically, it was a difference between the amount of time to break this key was like 10 ages of the universe or a squillion ages of the universe.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, really? And the security was fighting that battle.
Oh man.
And I'm like, no, you got to be kidding me, because, well, first of all, the product basically, I'm not getting into all the details, but it was the size of an RSA key, and our products only allow up to 4,096-bit modulus for RSA. And their requirements for this particular type of key were 15,000 bits. I'm like, so I calculated it out. So to decrypt that key will take about 2 minutes, roughly, to decrypt a key. So let's just worry about the performance impact of just decrypting the key. It's 2 minutes. So you walk into your office, you turn on your computer, you run your application. Now you go and wait 2 minutes for the key to decrypt. So that's crazy. Second, I know of no single product that supports 15,000-bit RSA modulus, like actually in the product. And we're talking literally 10 times the age of the universe versus a squillion times the age of the universe. I mean,
By the time they crack it, quantum's going to be out anyway.
Yeah.
So
I'm like, did they think that the adversaries that they got, quantum computer clusters that they're just sitting here?
But
the sun would dim.
I really want to finish this thought, but in all seriousness, I understand why the security guys are coming from this angle, because that was the letter of the law. Problem is, this particular feature was worth a lot of money to the company, a lot of money. Why delay it over this one thing where basically, if I need the key, I'm just going to put a gun to your head anyway? I mean, really? Or through some other kind of vulnerability, maybe I'll get the key that way. I mean, there are way easier ways people don't break crypto, right? They get the keys. I'm more worried about how you're protecting that 15,000-bit key versus the actual crypto itself. And that's what drives me completely nuts about a lot of security people, is they're absolutely black and white, and you can't do that. And I think that's why a lot of CISOs fail, is because they just see it as an impediment to getting anything done at the company. And that's why I think there's a lot of turnover in the world of the CISO.
Got to enable the business, not block it. Yeah,
absolutely.
The problem is everybody like buzzwords, and they'll say it, but they won't do it. Like, there is acceptable risk when you understand the scenarios that could expose you, and then how minute those chances are. And then you adjust based on the capabilities of adversaries, computing power, new technologies, legacy technologies that are bringing vulnerabilities forward with the newer technologies. There are not a lot of big brain thinkers like you, Michael. They can take that in, because when someone says ship now, ship this shit now. I don't have all day, and but if you say it in an open room, have you sort of eliminated plausible denial? Because someone said it in the room.
Yeah, I think, and this is why it's so important to make just security just sort of part of the process and as frictionless as possible. So that if someone does say ship now, at least we know we've done a level of due diligence, right? Because we do it all the time. We do security all the time. We're not waiting for the pen test results, right? Every single day we run these tools. Every single day we have static analysis, dynamic analysis. We've educated the developers on building secure software. We know where the data came from because of the threat models, right? So you're doing that every single day, and our CI/CD pipeline does this, that, and the other to help at least let's set a level, level of knowledge or a level of sort of quality, security quality for that particular design. So that way, if someone says we're shipping tomorrow, we feel good, right? Because we've done everything that we possibly can on a day-to-day basis. Might there be an outstanding issue that needs to be fixed? Possibly, but at least I know what my security posture is right now versus the old model, which is write as much crap as you want, wait until the end, run the static analysis tools. The static analysis tools find a whole bunch of issues. You ignore them because we're shipping anyway. Right. And then we did the pen test and they find a bunch of issues. Well, we're shipping anyway.
Right. And when you wanted to come on, Michael, you said, let's talk about SecDevOps in your posting, and security comes first, where we hear DevOps, DevSecOps. You said, I want to come on and talk about SecDevOps, where we start with security inherently and enable the business. And I think that leads to the point you're trying to make here.
Exactly.
And I did not find that nuance. Brody called that nuance. You're right. The way you say it.
You guys are harassing him before this thing started.
Yeah.
They always harass
He's the only one who picks up on it.
Yeah, there you go. So as we get ready to close this out, we're at 14 after. Let me ask you this question, Mike. You've done, I'm leaving Microsoft, Edward. Okay. Start your own business. What you gonna do? Yeah. What you gonna do? You're going
diving.
Yeah. No.
Scuba diving.
You're working. You're not diving.
I'm diving.
Here's a boatload of cash.
It is the only time I don't think about work is when I'm scuba diving. Serious.
I'm getting recertified now. But I'm asking, you're going to start your own thing here. I see this need. Nobody's addressing it. I'm going to go out here. I got an idea. Do you have an idea?
I mean, I have an idea, but let me just sort of frame it. If I was to leave I love Microsoft. Even after 30 years, I still feel as excited as I do today as I did 30 years ago. That's 30 years. There's a lot of stuff changed in those 30 years.
Crystals.
There you go. But the reason why I enjoy it is because I have this intersection. I'm lucky enough that I have this intersection that I thoroughly enjoy, which is security and application development. And I love that intersection. Love it. I love everything about it. I love writing about it. That's why I'm writing book number 8, right? That's why I'm doing it. And the funny thing is, as I'm writing it, I'm just, on the keyboard, the keyboard's catching on fire. And the reason is because it's just flowing, right? It's just something I'm so passionate about, just love it. And so whatever I do, it would be the intersection of security and development. Now, there is a third aspect to that, which is the cloud, right? So that sort of leads to sort of one thing, which is, helping people design, build, deploy, and manage REST endpoints. Because everything's a REST endpoint today. I'll tell you right now, go to a customer and say, give me a list of all your REST endpoints, your own REST endpoints, not REST endpoints into Azure or REST endpoints into Azure DevOps or anything like that. Your REST endpoints. Give me a list of all of them. You know what? They won't be able to give you the list.
Nope.
They won't be able to.
Not at all. I was on the
scary.
call with someone and they asked,
scary.
and they were like, well, we need a contact here and we have a separate group here. Oh, and then we also use external vendors to write some of this stuff.
Yep.
That's how they get exploited because of that.
Exactly.
Over and over again.
I mean, if you don't know your REST endpoints, how can you protect it?
Well, man, this has been enlightening to me to be able to listen to these conversations. I might not be able to carry the conversation the way you are, but I can listen and not feel like the dumb guy in the room. So when I'm hearing these things go across, I can tell who's having a valid argument or who's someone who just wants to call mess, right? And it's good stuff. Man, thanks.
Plug your podcast, plug your book. We want to hear about it.
Actually, in all seriousness, this is the first time I've even talked about it publicly. So yeah. I'm really excited for it. The crypto chapter, which is kind of funny. I was budgeted to do 25 pages for the crypto chapter. I put the pen down, so to speak, at 89 pages. It's like, couldn't help myself, right? Half of that's on Key Vault. Half of it's just on Key Vault.
Well, I'm thinking if someone can compromise an identity, circumvent your 2-factor, 3-factor, multi-factor, and your RBAC, the first thing I'm going after is your key store. I want it.
Yeah, I mean, there are multiple weak points, right? And even multi-factor can be can be worked
yeah.
around. I mean, that's a whole discussion for another day, but it is such a valid protection anyway. You should always be using it, always.
Yeah.
It raises the bar substantially. I mean, the only real issue is, if you're running, you log on to say an Azure portal, you get prompted for the multi-factor. So now you're in the Azure portal, and then you run some malicious software on your machine. It can now access the portal, right? And it's not going to pop the multi-factor because it's acting as you. And it's often referred to as the confused deputy problem. Is it actually you doing the work, or is it some code acting on your behalf, right? And that's so So the moral of that story is endpoint protection as well. So,
well, yes, that and putting layers of it. Like, yeah, you did multi-factor, but why are you acting like Bruce? You Bruce Banner, but you want to add like the Hulk. So why aren't you PIMing in, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And don't let everybody be Hulk all day. You got to be Banner sometime.
Hey, no standing access. Period.
Yeah, no humans in prod. I love it.
No humans in prod, baby. No humans in prod.
That's it. Well, Michael, thank you so much for your time, sir. Post show, anything that you'd like for us to share across our impact medium, social media, whatever else, we're gladly to do it. And you're more than welcome to say, hey, Ed, I want to come on. I got an axe to grind. Come on. We got plenty grinders here. You can grind that axe. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Very insightful, Michael. Thank you.
I actually went axe throwing 2 weeks ago.
It's
a workout.
Yeah.
After about 15 minutes, because the instructor was a female, she said, I'm just going to watch you. And finally, when that thing hit flat and bounced back against me, she said, now you ready to listen? I was like, yeah, absolutely. She picked up that axe. And she said, I'm going to put this one to the right. I'm going to put this one to the left. And I want this one on top of that. It's not so much a force, it's technique. By the end of it, I had got to the middle level, and the heavier axes are easier to throw than the short hand axes. Because now you got to account for rotation and stuff. But it was actually enjoyable.
Cool.
So if we hear of anyone getting murdered by axe in your neighborhood, we know who it was.
Yeah, he's been practicing. Yeah.
Oh yeah, for sure.
He was talking about completing that second marriage. So.
Yeah. Zing. Rod hasn't said anything the whole hour. Zing. Yeah.
Oh my God.
Hey, if anything, I hear her downstairs stumping like, I don't know what the concept of 6 o'clock is, Ed. Why it's lost on you. My wife, we eat dinner every Wednesday. I got to go do this thing.
Right.
That's in trouble.
Yeah. Stay on, Mike. We'll close out here.
Sounds good.
And so, Edward, until next week.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Good times.
Thanks, guys. Really appreciate you taking this, inviting me on the show. Appreciate it. When you let me back on it, if you let me back on again, is another issue.
Come on anytime. Don't answer our questions, but answer our questions anytime you want. It's all good. Yeah.
Fantastic.
There you go.
Oh, by the way, Frank, we need to get like an ending audio thing for our podcast.